Hello and welcome to this episode of Triggered and True, featuring renowned emotional health consultant Laura Duncan. Thank you for being here, and thank you for investing the time to learn how to take care of your soul. If this podcast sparks any questions, feel free to submit a question by going to triggeredandtrue.com, scrolling to the bottom of the page and clicking Ask. If you would like to learn more about Laura Duncan, we encourage you to follow Laura on Instagram and Facebook. Also, a great resource for you to consider is the Compassion Method Master Course. This course is a deep dive into Laura's life work, the Compassion Method. The Compassion Method is a process that empowers you to learn to see and comfort your internal pain and to discover your true self, that beautiful, wonderful part of you that has been there all along, but has simply been covered up. To obtain the master course, go to compassionmethod.net. And as a podcast listener, you qualify for a $50 discount that can be obtained by typing in the coupon code podcast50. Again, that's compassionmethod.net, coupon code podcast50. We hope you enjoy this episode. Hello and welcome everybody to this episode of Triggered and True. Thank you for joining us. And Laura, great to have you here again today.
Yes, thanks for having me, Brian.
Yeah, thanks for being on your podcast. So.
Yeah, but thank you very much. Brian's the organizing master behind all of this, and I really appreciate it.
And we really appreciate having listeners. And a lot of this podcast was designed to help Laura spread beyond just being able to meet with people one-on-one, because I felt Laura had so much to share, and the podcast is a great platform for her to share it. But what really motivates me and makes this really exciting is getting the feedback from listeners, getting questions, and seeing that, the podcast is bearing fruit in people's lives. So thank you for taking the time to listen. And
thank you.
We really appreciate you, our listeners. So today we're going to be talking about the topic of divorce and how divorce connects with the compassion method process. And just want to start off asking you, Laura, why did we decide to do this topic, and why was it on your heart to do this topic?
Yeah, I'm really excited to do this episode, or this podcast episode, because just the fact that a lot of people that have been through divorce or going through divorce haven't gotten divorce counseling. You don't hear that as something that people walk through. If you're trying to save your marriage or work through issues that are causing you to want to get a divorce, you'll usually do marriage counseling, but you won't do divorce counseling. So what ends up happening is we deal with a lot of the external things with divorce, like finances, custody, our relationship with our ex, but we don't actually take the time, or we don't have the resource to be able to take care of the pain that's in our heart. And so taking care of your internal world in divorce is something that often gets neglected in the process of divorce. Even if you were divorced 10 years ago, you potentially didn't take care of your inner world, and you're still dealing with some of those ramifications.
I think that's so true. There's so many logistical things around a divorce.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it's grown fairly common as well. And people are just focused on the logistics,
which can actually make compounded pain. So you have the pain and the grief of the divorce as far as emotionally and relationally. And then now you have the pain of potentially, paying more than you expected to pay in finances. And now you have that pain and that resentment and the custody issues of not being able to have your kids as much. So that causes pain. So you have kind of a compounded pain that ends up happening as well.
Well, there's also, I think, what we talk a lot about blame, and how blame is a way to deflect pain. And I think in divorce, there's lots of opportunities.
Lots of blame.
Yeah.
Justifiable blame. There's very real reasons that people get divorced. That's justifiable. But again, like we've said before, that blame keeps us from taking care of our inner world, and we just manage our external world.
One quote that I've heard you say before is that you say that usually in divorce, both do not really want it.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain that?
So when we're triggered, when our amygdala is engaged, like we talked about in our triggered episode, when our amygdala is engaged, it's almost like being drunk. We're making decisions and not in a sober emotional place. So many times it's not connected with our true self, it's connected with our trigger self. So it's coming from a reaction, not a response to what's really going on inside of our hearts. Obviously, there's probably people that connect to their true self and they still do want a divorce, but I would say that percentage is very low because there's a reason why you decided to be with that person in the first place before triggers started, before we started to want to make a decision like divorce in that non-sober, triggered way.
So in other words, I think what I heard you say is that you think it's you that wants to leave the marriage, but oftentimes it's really your triggered
exactly,
that wants
which
to leave
would
the
be
marriage.
your child self in a lot of ways, because something's getting triggered from your early childhood development that's causing you to have big all or nothing feelings. Many times that's what divorce is. There's no way out. We keep going around the same mountain. Nothing's ever going to change. It's always going to be this way. So I need to get divorced to get out of this. It's like a fight or flight choice. It's not coming from that sober, sophisticated adult brain that's able to actually recognize what's going on and work through that. First of all, personally within yourself, and then second in your marriage.
Now, this could be, I could see someone listening to this getting triggered. And,
definitely.
So just speak to someone that would maybe receive that in not such a great way of maybe almost being combative of like, but no, it's what's best, and,
exactly.
and because it could be what's best.
Definitely. And that's what I always tell people when they come in and meet with me as couples or as individuals that are deciding if they want to get a divorce or not. I always say, maybe divorce is the best option for you. And because I don't know, I'm not in their shoes. I don't know their story. I don't know their process. Maybe it is best for them. And you that are listening, when you're saying you don't know my story and it was the best decision, I fully respect people's process because we all have different stories that we're going through, and it might be the best for you. But the challenge is, if we did even percentages, how much of a percentage is being made out of our triggered brain, even if it's still the right choice for us, and how much is being made out of our sophisticated brain. And I still challenge people that really believe that divorce is the right choice for them to still work through the things that are being triggered and then make that decision. Because if that's the right decision for you, if you're making it out of a triggered state, it's going to cause so much more disruption within yourself and even in the process of divorce when we're still in a triggered state, even if we believe that's the right choice for us.
Yeah. And I think, what kind of conjures up in my mind is some of the real extreme examples where there's severe abuse happening and things along those lines. But even then, you'd want to make that decision, not from a trigger, but from your true self, because you're going to be able to stick with that decision.
Exactly. So many of the times when you see severe abuse, people go back to the relationship, whether they stay married or they just go back to the person because they're so triggered in it that even though they still believe that divorce is the right option, they still go back to the abuse. So definitely, whether it is the right decision for you or there's severe circumstances connected to it, you still want to walk through the trigger, even if you still decide to have a divorce.
Yeah, because that kind of leads back to the topics we've talked before about with the codependency.
Yeah.
Like they can't be okay without that other person or trying to make that other person okay.
And also think about codependency with divorce as your way out.
Like I can't be okay unless I get divorced.
Exactly. Yep. And that's coming from that triggered brain. That's all or nothing, life or death, high stakes. And any decision we make, again, like I use the example of it's almost like you're drunk when you're making that decision, when you're in a triggered place. You don't want to make any major life decisions in that type of, when we're in that part of our brain, that's not going to be able to make rational, logical adult decisions.
So we have talked extensively about codependence, and I just kind of hit it on it a little bit. And I think it's very important to this topic that we maybe just kind of review that a little bit from our when we have a whole podcast on codependence. So you're welcome to go back and listen to that. But why don't you just give a brief synopsis again? And I kind of mentioned it, but go ahead and give your summary.
Yeah. So I like to bring it down to just one sentence, just because codependency can become kind of complicated, or we're not sure if we have it or we don't have it. And how I look at codependency is anything. And in this context, it's within marriage and divorce, anything that I'm not okay internally if this other person's not okay, or my marriage is not okay. And so it creates this codependency. And specifically in marriage, what the codependency looks like is having unmet needs from childhood, which I like to call capital N needs, that we're frantically in our child brain trying to get met through our marriage. And when that doesn't work, many times that's when people decide to get married. You're not going to be able to meet that need. So, excuse me, decide to get married as well, but decide to get a
Right.
divorce because that need's not being met. They initially decided to get married, trying to
They
get
want
those
to get
needs
that
met.
need met. Right.
And then when it didn't work for whatever reasons, then they decide to get a divorce because they're not getting those capital N needs, those childhood needs met. And it's so important to recognize where our needs are being met. And if we're trying to get them met in a triggered state, because that spouse is never going to be able to meet those needs. So, of course, you're going to want to get a divorce because you're trying to get childhood needs met as an adult through your spouse. And that codependency is I'm not okay if you don't meet my needs. You need to meet my needs for me to be okay. And when you don't, I need to get rid of you.
When I first started learning this through your process that you've developed, it kind of freaked me out a little bit because I recognized not only codependence in my marriage, but with my children, with my job, with my employees, with so many parents, so many places. And what kind of freaked me out is I was like, do I have any really healthy relationships anywhere? And what I realized, and I'm realizing more and more, is that two things can be true at one time.
Yeah, that's really important.
Are there elements of our marriages, of our relationships that are codependent, that are unhealthy? I think that every single person on this planet would have to say
everyone has
yes.
pain. Yep,
Yes.
exactly.
We would have to say yes. So there's no.
It
for me, kind of being the perfectionist, I kind of hear that description. I'm being like, oh man, that's, I got that everywhere, but,
yeah.
But that doesn't mean that there aren't also areas of those relationships that are healthy.
Exactly. And when we have those needs met, we can function in a non-codependent, adult to adult way and get those lowercase n needs met.
And the goal of the whole compassion method process is to pursue health.
Exactly.
We're becoming healthier and healthier. We're learning. It's like we're learning to eat better.
Exactly.
We're learning to take care of ourselves better. We're learning to eat better. We're exercising. We're doing these things. And this is all doing this for our emotional sake and our emotional health, just like we do some of these other things for our physical health. So,
but I do think that it's important in that codependency to be aware of it. So not in shame of, your relationship is just full of codependency, but to be aware of it. Because if I'm aware of it, I'm going to make decisions differently because I'm going to recognize I may not know how to take care of this codependency or exactly where it's coming from, but I am aware that it's potentially making me want to make this decision. And so I'm going to take care of the codependency. So again, I can make a more sober decision of where I want my marriage to go.
Yeah. And I think these decisions made from your true self will be made. Doesn't mean they're going to be easy. It's just they're made without regret.
Exactly. They even have peace involved, even though it's a very difficult decision. There's peace involved because you're making it from your true self, not your triggered self.
I think about the whole concept of, health in the relationship. It's learning to be with no matter what. It's learning to be with them, but also really with yourself. Like, even if it is chaotic or my spouse isn't that little thing that they do or whatever, I can still be okay. They don't have to change for me to be okay.
Exactly. And you think about it in the person that is being divorced from, sometimes it's not your choice to get a divorce. Sometimes your spouse has made that choice and you don't have a part in it. this is also an opportunity to take care of that codependency, because there's things outside of our control that we're not going to be able to always choose for ourselves, but we can still take care of our inner world, even in those situations as well.
Yeah. Knowing that you know that you can be okay no matter what.
Yeah. And my definition of okay is clear-minded, tender-hearted, at peace. Imagine a world that when people decided that the right choice for them was to get a divorce, that they made that choice with a clear mind, with a tender heart, and at peace. What would that look like for custody issues? What would that look like for how spouses were able to co-parent and have a relationship outside of divorce? It would make it look very different.
Yeah. They could be adults.
Yep, exactly. And that's what we want, especially if you have children in a divorce. You want to be able to be adults, not two kids fighting when you have kids that are going to be going through a very disruptive time of their life and going through their own grief process as well.
So at the beginning, we talked about how most of the focus is on the external, not the internal. And you actually talked about divorce being a grieving process. And, I oftentimes have heard that the talk of divorce as being as difficult to deal with as death, and potentially even more so, because there isn't a permission. Like with death, there is definitely, for the most part, permission to grieve. And it's talked about and it's expected. It's like everyone knows there's going to be grief, and there's
space, there's room for it, there's an expectation for it.
Right. There's people coming along, bringing you meals, doing all these things that people do to just show their love and support for you when you go through such a traumatic time. And divorce, for a lot of people, is every bit as traumatic and every bit as horrible as death.
Yeah.
And can you just expound on that some more?
Well, yeah, with divorce, there's usually so much shame connected to it. If you've been raised in a religious environment, divorce is seen as a very, negative, experience, as far as you feel shame connected to it. But in general, overall, there's a lot of shame connected to it, because usually there's mistakes that have been made, or there's, pain that has happened because of how we've treated one another in the process. And so we have all this, shame connected to it, that we're bad, or they're bad, or we are bad. And that keeps us from being able to have the compassion, because compassion is withheld instinctively when we have shame connected to a grief process. So I'll say that one more time, that compassion is withheld when we have shame connected to a grief process. And that can also be with a death, of course, when there's shame revolving around the death, but specifically around divorce, shame is one of the main components to it. How many people have you talked to that have had a divorce that said, I should have? Yeah.
We feel compassion is something that needs to be earned.
Earned, yeah, exactly.
And then if we screwed up, we don't deserve it.
Think about the person that had an affair, and that's why they're getting a divorce. That person has so much shame around the terrible choice that they made to have an affair, that they have no process for grief. And even if you made a terrible decision like that, it's still going to be connected to a grieving process. But there's so much shame there that we usually don't give ourselves compassion. And others around us are very rarely going to give us compassion, especially when we were, quote unquote, bad or wrong.
But really, we were just triggered.
And our pain causes us to make choices like that. And it doesn't excuse the behavior whatsoever. If you're listening and someone, you have an affair that happened and you're hurt by that, I'm not condoning it. I'm not excusing it. But it was pain or unmet need that caused that type of behavior to take place. And being able to recognize that it's not our true self and it's not their true self brings a lot of healing as well.
Yeah, what you do matters, but who you are matters more.
Definitely, even in a severe situation like having an affair or getting a divorce. But like I said before, the shame that's revolving around the divorce, even if you just, don't get along anymore, you outgrew your love, or whatever the reasons that people have for divorce, there's usually still shame connected to it. And that, again, withholds compassion, self-compassion, and compassion from those around us.
Yeah. And that would definitely be a block in the healing process. It is like the block.
Yeah, you can't grieve because you have no right to feel sad because you are divorced.
So what are some common things? I mean, sometimes, a lot of the purpose of this podcast is to just kind of be an eye opener, just to increase awareness.
Yeah.
And one of the ways I think maybe with some of the awareness is to kind of recognize some of the things you do. So if you're not taking care of the pain, if you're not applying compassion, it's not like the pain's there. Okay.
It's still there, even if like I said, it was 10 years ago.
We
It's
can
still
ignore it. We can stuff it. We can do whatever we
We can
want
get
with it.
we can get remarried again.
That's where I was going to ask you, what are some common
one.
things that you see people doing? So if they're not taking care of
Yeah.
their pain, the pain's got to go
Yeah.
somewhere. So what are some common things people do to cope, to deal with that pain?
Yeah, that's a great question. So statistically, people get remarried very quickly. They have all this pain that surfaces in a divorce, but because they didn't actually take care of their inner world, like we talked about in the beginning, now they're trying to, how when we have pain, we displace it on blame. Well, when we have pain, sometimes we displace it on a person because we want to remarry that person to be able to meet our needs in the way that our first spouse was not able to do. And so commonly people get remarried to medicate the pain that they haven't been able to take care of. Other people sometimes go into addictive go into different addictions. Like maybe they will start drinking excessively, or they'll go into having sex with multiple partners, and they'll start to just kind of be like, just that kind of like shameless thing of just like, I already feel shame connected to divorce. So now I'm going to become shameless, which is not shame free, shameless. And I don't care what I do because I'm already divorced. So I might as well just go out and do whatever. And so you see a lot of people making decisions that center around different types of addictions, trying to medicate. Even you'll see people exercising excessively or losing a bunch of weight. That's very common. Not that exercising, losing weight is a negative thing, but it's coming from pain that says, I don't feel okay within myself. So I'm going to lose all this weight and I'm going to exercise excessively because that's going to medicate my pain. So there's all different forms of, we've talked about before, like protectors or ways of comforting ourselves or medicating instead of actually taking care of the pain.
So when you have someone you're working with, let's say in some sort of a setting, and you see this happening.
Yeah.
You see it, like, to you, it's like probably pretty obvious, like what's going on, because you've seen these scenarios a lot. How do you speak to them, and how do you speak to them to help them?
Well, I recognize that it's coming from their pain, that a lot of the decisions they're making post-divorce is coming from pain, just like the decisions they potentially made in their marriage was coming from pain that led to divorce. So a lot of these things, these medications, these things we do are ultimately comforting our pain. They're comforters, but they're false forms of comfort because they actually end up hurting us and causing us to, they don't last. They're like, you feel good for a moment, but then you don't. People go on dating sites right away because it makes them feel valuable and it makes them feel like somebody cares. But then a lot of times they end up realizing it's empty, and they're trying to frantically feel loved and cared for through these dating sites. Not that dating sites are wrong, but they're trying to get this need met and it just isn't satisfied. So it becomes an insatiable need because we're not actually treating or taking care of the real pain.
So when you're working with them, I have a pretty strong suspicion that you're not just kind of picking apart those things that they're doing.
Like, for example, whatever the addiction is, I'm not saying you need to stop that right now. We need to get healthy. I would never approach it that way. I would recognize that pain was causing it. If we take care of the pain, the addictive behaviors, they'll stop. They'll minimize. They'll eventually go away because we won't need them anymore because we actually got true comfort.
That is a very different approach. Your general approach to that, whether we're talking about this particular topic or another one, is very different from how a lot of this goes down, because the behavior, the destructive behavior, the thing that's quote unquote wrong, that often becomes center stage.
And then more judgment, more shame is connected to it because now we've compounded it, like I talked about before. Now on our, when we're keeping track of how good we are or how bad we are, now on our list of bad, we have a divorce, and now we have all the behaviors that followed the divorce that came from our pain as well. And you can see how it can become a very dark place for a lot of people because their behavior is running their life because pain has not been taken care of.
It's so easy to make those behaviors or those things the main event when really they're just a sideshow.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's why when I work with people one-on-one, I make it the side. I don't make it the main event. The person is the main event.
Yeah.
The pain that they're going through is the main event. Their behaviors is secondary. And if we put all of our attention on the behaviors to fix them and change them, but we don't take care of the root and the pain that's causing them, they're just going to resurface in another way. I'll see that extreme where people will go kind of off the deep end and then they'll like come back to like religion, for example, and then they'll be super religious about it. But both are not serving them. Both are a medication to the pain.
One's just more socially acceptable.
Mm-hmm. So then when people and you'll see that a lot of times, one spouse will be the good spouse after a divorce, and one will be the bad spouse after a divorce. One will go off the deep end. One will become so good to cover up their shame.
But they both went off the deep end.
Exactly. They both went off the deep end. One went into good to protect themselves, and one went into bad to protect themselves. But they're both shame. And they're both going to cover up our pain and not allow compassion to be able to touch those places in our heart that need compassion desperately.
So just moving forward. So someone that's maybe listening, or they know someone that's been in these positions, moving forward, we've increased some awareness now.
Yeah.
So
Yep, exactly. So not reframing it just to kind of like pretty up divorce so we feel better about it, but reframing it in what it truly is. It is a grief process. Start with that. Start by acknowledging this is a grief process. You potentially have a lot of blame and a lot of pain, and you're saying it's not a grief process. They made this choice. It's not my problem. We have a lot of walls up when it comes to it. But acknowledging whether you chose the divorce or the divorce was chosen for you, this is a grief process that needs to be taken care of as if a death happened. Just because it turned out badly doesn't take away from all the beautiful memories and the good moments that you had with your spouse, especially if you raised children and had a family and had a life together. There's so many things to grieve in that we don't acknowledge because the end covered up the whole story.
So there's a process of comforting that grief, and remote control exercise would be a great place.
Exactly. Compassion list is so important. Being able to connect with compassion for yourself, regardless of, what your part was in it. You need compassion in it and recognizing that you're grieving.
And just by recognizing you're grieving, giving yourself permission to feel that grief.
Mm-hmm. Give yourself time, give yourself space. It sounds, maybe pencil out some time on your calendar to actually sit with the grief and acknowledge what you're feeling. If you're angry in your divorce, it's covering up sadness or loneliness or scared. It's okay to be angry, but eventually we want to be able to move past the anger to what our heart is really feeling in this divorce.
Yeah, the soft emotion behind that.
Yeah, that soft emotion is there no matter what has happened to you or no matter what you've done. There's a soft emotion, a tender emotion below the pain that a lot of people just stay stuck in the anger for years and years and never allow themselves to take care of those tender emotions that are connected to it.
I've heard you say before about anger that it's just simply unprocessed, sad, scared, lonely.
Yep. And so it gets all bottled up and pressed down because we're so angry and we're so hurt. And we're in so much blame that we press it down and press it down and press it down. And then it becomes that volcano that erupts. But if we actually took care of those tender emotions and processed those emotions and felt them and applied comfort to them and compassion and nurture, then they would heal and we wouldn't be so angry anymore.
This whole process tends to be a little bit counterintuitive because in order for this to be effective, we have to turn into the pain. We have to let ourselves feel it.
Yeah. And that's the hardest part. That's why the beginning is so hard, just to acknowledge I am sad. I am hurting because everything inside of us is pushing that away.
We want to deny that. Yeah. We just want to pretend it's not there, move on to the next thing.
Exactly. But we carry it with us. We carry it with us into the next relationship. We carry it with us on a day-to-day basis. And it might, we might be able to, cover it up so much that we're not feeling it to its intensity, but eventually we're going to feel it again until it's actually comforted and taken care of.
And we tend to build, as we age, we tend to build more and more elaborate systems to take care of ourselves. And I have such an appreciation for why sometimes when you see older people and some of the wild idiosyncrasies and the particularness of things, and you're just like, what happened? They're so bitter. They're so, and they have all these idiosyncrasies, like they can't do this, they can't do that. And this has to be done this way and that. And it's like, that is a lifetime of uncomforted pain just stacking on top of each other.
Exactly. And that's what we see when divorced people's pain does not get taken care of. It just continues to happen until, like you're saying, until you're so many protectors and so many defenses, you can't be your true self anymore.
Yeah, you don't know who you are.
Yeah. You're still are your true self, but it's just so covered up by those coping mechanisms.
I was talking to somebody recently about someone that was divorced for quite a while, and I'm like, can you describe that person's true self? And this person's quite a bit younger than them. They're like, I don't know. I've just never seen it. I just, I'm like, well, it's there.
Yeah.
That it's still with that person. It's just really, really, really covered up.
Yeah.
But it's still there. And I guarantee you it comes out every now and then.
Yep, exactly. And we, because of our trigger, can't see it.
Yeah,
so
because they're probably hurting trigger, us at the same time.
Exactly. Yeah, right. We can more clearly see it. But that's a really good point, Brian, that being a part of the healing process, once you've grieved, once you've gotten proper comfort and your heart is full, part of the grieving or part of the process of healing is to be able to look back at that person from my true self and be able to see their true self. Even if you never talk to that person again that you divorced, being able to see their true self helps bring forgiveness and healing to your heart. So I don't recommend doing that in the beginning by any means, but eventually, once you've taken care of the pain and unmet need, and you've walked your heart through the remote control exercise, and you've been able to grieve the process, and you get to a place where your heart feels properly comforted, your heart feels full, practice from your true self, looking back at their true self. Because when we can see who they are, it helps us recognize that what they did to us matters, but they matter more. And that actually allows them not to be the villain in our life that we've created through our trigger, or they've created through their trigger.
I've heard you say oftentimes too, there are no villains.
There is no villains. And if they remain the villain for the rest of your life because you can't see their true self, then you're haunted by it. Just like with unforgiveness, we choose not to forgive because we want to punish that person, but we suffer. When we don't see their true self and we just see them as a villain, they don't suffer, we suffer.
And many people see themselves as the villain.
Very often, depending upon your role in the divorce, you're either the villain or you believe they're the villain. And there's no villains in divorce. There's two hurting children that are making decisions from that place, and not just in the divorce, but throughout their marriage, that needed to be comforted and cared for to be able to become the adults that they were meant to be in their marriage, their true selves.
So, and I think we've hit it a lot, but I'm just thinking about, what would you say to someone who is divorced and can now look back and recognize, like maybe they're hearing everything you're saying and there's like some real aha moments going on, and there's some real regret, there's some shame, all those things coming up. What would you say to them?
It's definitely hard sometimes to face these things. A lot of our denials and coping mechanisms keep us from having to really face our heart in it and what we went through. But give yourself a lot of compassion. Give yourself a lot of patience. Recognize that you never would have done the things that you had done if you had been okay, if you had been full, and being able to be patient with yourself, because regret and all those things that come when we recognize, decisions that we made that came from more of a triggered place are only going to keep us trapped in that pain as well. And so it's okay to feel that feeling, just like it's okay to feel anger. But what's behind the regret? Is behind the regret sadness or scared or lonely, just like whatever's behind your anger? Regret is a reaction, it's a trigger. And so we want to be able to take care of what's behind it.
One of the responses I have when I recognize something where I've wronged someone or did something that was hurtful is like, I want to go try to fix it right away.
Yeah.
And we want to urge people not to do that.
Exactly.
What you do matters. So asking for forgiveness is definitely a powerful thing and something that may need to be done. But you first need to make sure it's coming from a place of, I'm okay.
Yeah, exactly. Because sometimes just wanting to be sorry for what we did is a form of medication that still avoids the pain. It just says, I'll feel better if I say sorry for what I did, but it doesn't actually acknowledge what caused you to have that behavior in the beginning. And so we want to acknowledge that root pain first, because it also is going to make your apology so much richer when it comes from not just trying to cover up what you did to feel better, but to actually be sorry from your true self.
And you may not be in a position to, that's where you can think through from the true self. Is this even, do I even go about this right now? How do I go about this?
Yeah.
And maybe I feel it in my heart and I'm waiting for the moment because it could inflame things worse,
Exactly. And that's what we don't know until we've actually worked through the trigger. That's why a lot of times with confronting, people are like, but when do you confront? Like they're all like biting at the bit to confront.
Maybe never.
Exactly.
Could you be okay with that? Maybe never.
Exactly.
Maybe you
because
never
that
confront.
Confronting is very similar to, I just want to say sorry so I feel better. I just want to confront so they understand what they did. But that's still a medication. It's not necessarily taking care of what's behind it. And once we do take care of it, many times we don't need to confront because that confronting wasn't about them. It was really about us.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying you don't ever confront by any means, but a lot of our confronting comes from being triggered, not from actually having a confrontation that's going to lead to my heart being taken care of. And confrontation is similar to boundaries. It shouldn't be against the other person. We don't confront to go against the other person. We confront to be able to take care of our hearts. Just like we put boundaries in place for ourselves, not against others.
You reference this a lot, but being offensive versus defensive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What are we really trying to get out of that confronting? What are we really trying to get out of that sorry? How are we medicating? And how can we properly take care of it instead?
Yeah.
Because that confronting is going to be so much more productive if it's coming from a non-triggered state as well.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So just to kind of conclude our time today, is there anything else you'd like to share in summary, Laura?
I just wanted to share when I was preparing to do this podcast, I just felt a lot of compassion for people that have gone through divorce. I know with my husband dying and going through his death, I know it's different than divorce, but I feel like there's some similar components to it. And I just felt a lot of compassion. I know divorce is such a painful process, no matter what the circumstances are, no matter what the story is. And I just wanted to speak to you. If you've been divorced, I'm proud of you. I know this has been probably such a painful, difficult journey. And I just think this is such an opportunity for you to be kind to yourself, for you to be compassionate with yourself, and to recognize how brave you've been, even in your mistakes, even when you haven't known what to do. And that this is an opportunity for you to be able to take care of your pain in your divorce, but also even going back to your childhood, to be able to take care of these things that have been impacting you, affecting you more than you've known your whole life. So this is really an opportunity now to grieve and to get what your heart needs.
Again, counterintuitive. That it's an opportunity, but it absolutely is.
It really is. This isn't, the divorce is like the grand finale of a lot of small pains that have grown into that. So taking care of this, you'll find that this is going to be more of a journey and a discovery and an opportunity to go to places that you probably didn't even realize have impacted your divorce.
Well, very good. Thank you so much for sharing, Laura. And thank you, everyone, for listening. Reminder, if you have any questions about today's podcast or any of the previous ones, to go to our website and submit that, and we'll answer it on air, or we'll shoot you an email response. So thank you again, everyone. And thank you, Laura.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Bye-bye. Thank you again for joining us for this episode of Triggered and True. We hope that you enjoyed it. As a reminder, if you would like to ask a question, go to triggeredandtrue.com, scroll down to the bottom of the page, and click Ask. And if you would like to learn more about the Compassion Method, be sure to check out the Compassion Method Master Course, which can be purchased at compassionmethod.net. And as a podcast listener, you qualify for a $50 discount, which can be obtained by typing in the coupon code podcast50. Again, that's compassionmethod.net, coupon code podcast50. Thank you again. Goodbye.